I always believed that children often notice the things adults overlooked. They watched quietly, absorbing details we dismissed, storing truths behind the silence of their innocent eyes. But nothing prepared me for the moment my 7-year-old son, Malik, tugged at my sleeve just minutes before I was about to leave for work. The morning light was soft, the house calm, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, yet his little fingers trembled as if he were holding on to something heavier than his small body could carry. I bent down to his level, expecting to hear about a broken toy or a missing homework assignment, but instead, he leaned close to my ear, his voice barely a whisper, and breathed the words that shattered the ground beneath my feet. "Mom, someone is taking Daddy's place when you're gone." Those words slithered into my chest like ice, making my heartbeat stumble. At first, I thought I must have misunderstood him. Surely, he didn't mean what it sounded like. But the look on his face, that mixture of fear, confusion, and loyalty, told me he believed every syllable he spoke. I tried to remain calm, though inside me a storm churned wildly. I asked him what he meant, and he told me, in the disjointed, painfully honest way children do, that whenever I left for work, another woman came to the house. She talked to his father softly, sometimes touched his arm, sometimes stayed until the sun began to dip. "They don't know I see them," he said. "But I do." My lips went dry as I stared at him, trying to make sense of what he was telling me. Infidelity had never crossed my mind, not once in the entire 10 years I'd been married to David. We had arguments, yes. We had misunderstandings, yes. But he had always looked me in the eyes with a kind of sincerity that made me trust him. So either my child had misunderstood something completely, or my husband had been lying to me in a way I never imagined he could. I didn't want Malik to feel guilty or responsible for telling me this, so I pulled him close, kissed the top of his head, and told him he did the right thing, even though my own breath came shaky and tight. He asked me if I was mad at Daddy. I told him no, not yet. Because anger wasn't what I felt in that moment. It was fear. Fear of what I might discover. Fear of a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. As I stood up, I realized that my hands were trembling. I walked to the kitchen, pretending to grab my car keys, pretending everything was normal, pretending that my world wasn't collapsing inward. I looked at my reflection in the window, the weak morning sun outlining the tiredness beneath my eyes, and I knew I couldn't go to work. Not today. My mind wouldn't allow it. My heart wouldn't allow it. Instead, I decided to pretend I was leaving, to let the day unfold as Malik had seen it many times before. I opened the front door loudly, told David I'd see him later, kissed Malik goodbye, and stepped outside. But I didn't go to the car. I didn't leave the driveway. I slipped around the side of the house, pressed my back against the wall, and waited. The seconds stretched into minutes, and the tension clawed inside my chest like a restless animal. My breath was shallow, my palms sweaty, and every sound from inside the house made my nerves jolt. I could hear faint footsteps, the clinking of a mug, and David humming lightly, a careless tune that felt like a betrayal in itself. I thought maybe Malik misunderstood everything. Maybe the woman was a delivery person or a neighbor seeking help with something, or someone completely harmless. I clung to the hope like it was a lifeline. But 20 minutes after I left, I heard the doorbell ring. I froze. David walked to the door. I could hear his footsteps crossing the hardwood floor, and then the soft, welcoming tone in his voice when he said, "Hey, come in." My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. There was no hesitation in his voice, no confusion, no surprise. She was expected. I slowly pressed myself closer to the window, trying to peek without being seen, heart thudding so hard I feared it would give me away. And then I saw her, a woman in a pale green blouse, her hair neatly tied back, holding a folder against her chest. She wasn't overly dressed up, not seductive in a stereotypical sense, but comfortable, familiar. She walked inside with a smile that was too soft, too warm, too familiar. I watched David close the door behind her, leaning slightly toward her as he spoke. Something inside me cracked. But instead of storming inside, instead of screaming or confronting or collapsing, I stayed frozen outside the window, because a feeling deeper than anger began to bloom in my chest, a strange, quiet certainty that whatever I was witnessing was not as simple as my son believed. And as they moved into the living room together, speaking in low tones, I realized something. This wasn't the behavior of two lovers. This was something else. Something more complicated. Something darker. Something I wasn't prepared for. And that realization, that there was a secret between my husband and this woman that Malik had misinterpreted, made the air feel heavier, the tension sharper, and my fear even more suffocating. I didn't know it then, but what I was about to uncover would not only shake my marriage, it would endanger everything I owned. And the people involved were far more cunning than I imagined. I stayed outside, heart pounding, waiting to hear more, unaware that this day would mark the beginning of the biggest battle of my life. I stayed pressed against the cold wall of my own home, listening through the fragile silence for anything that could explain what was happening inside. My breath fogged lightly in the morning air, and I could feel my pulse beating in strange places, in my throat, in my fingertips, even in my stomach. I leaned closer to the window, trying to steady myself, trying to understand the tone between the two people moving just out of sight. There was no flirtation in their voices, no laughter coated with hidden meaning, no affectionate touches that would confirm the worst of my fears. Instead, their voices carried a tension I couldn't quite define, a tightness, a seriousness, a quiet urgency that only deepened my confusion. The woman set her folder on the table, and I saw David run a hand across his face like someone overwhelmed or frustrated or burdened with something he didn't want to face. My heart twisted painfully. This wasn't a casual meeting. This wasn't romance or lust. This felt like a secret, one with weight, one with consequences. The woman handed David a piece of paper from her folder. He stared at it for a long moment, then shook his head, a slow, defeated shake that made my stomach knot. She leaned toward him, speaking softly, but her expression was stern, not affectionate. I couldn't hear everything, but I could make out fragments. Words like deadline, agreement, transfer, and risk. They didn't fit the story Malik believed he was telling. This wasn't an affair. This was business, but not the kind of business you discussed openly. Something covert. Something stressful. Something dangerous. My mind raced through possibilities. Was David in debt? Was this woman some kind of consultant? A lawyer? A loan officer? A negotiator? But then I remembered Malik's frightened whisper. She comes when you're gone. She sits with Daddy for a long time. They talk quietly. They don't know I see them. Children didn't understand legal trouble, financial negotiations, or high-stakes deals. They understood closeness. They understood secrecy. They understood fear. And my son was scared because he thought this woman was taking me away from my own home. In his innocent eyes, she was replacing me because whatever she and David discussed made him feel pushed aside, small, invisible. But the deeper fear inside me was growing like a shadow. What was David hiding from me that required a stranger to visit our home in secrecy? And why did he think he couldn't tell me? I wanted to walk in and demand the truth, but something stopped me. A quiet voice inside telling me I needed to know more before confronting him. I needed to hear their words before they guarded them. So I edged closer, planting my ear against the thin window pane, praying the glass would carry enough sound for me to catch more pieces of the truth. My breath hitched when I finally heard David say, "I just need more time. You can't expect me to move everything without her noticing. She manages all the expenses. She checks the accounts." My blood turned cold. Move everything? What did that mean? Money? Assets? Documents? Something valuable enough to hide from me? The woman responded with a firmness that made my skin prickle. "You don't have more time, David. She's going to find out eventually, and by then it'll be too late. If you want this done cleanly, it has to happen before she becomes suspicious. Everything has to be transferred before the 15th. Otherwise, you both lose more than you can imagine." Transferred. Before I find out. Lose more than we can imagine. The words slammed into me like a wave. This wasn't emotional betrayal. It was financial. Something tied to danger, urgency, secrecy. Something that involved me, my name, my assets, my life, without my knowledge. Suddenly the air felt too thin, my chest too tight. It felt like my home. The place I built with love, the place I trusted, had become a cage full of shadows whispering lies. I pressed my hand against my mouth to keep from gasping. A betrayal of the heart was devastating, but a betrayal of trust that could destroy my future, my stability, my security. That was far worse. I knew I couldn't stay outside much longer. If David saw me, everything would crumble before I had answers. But I also knew I couldn't simply walk away.
Not now.
Not after hearing something so chilling. So I slipped quietly around the house to the backyard, where the larger window gave me a clearer view of the living room. The woman stood with her arms crossed, pacing slowly as she spoke, and David looked smaller than I had ever seen him. Not guilty, not flirtatious, not caught in desire, but defeated. Like a man trapped in a corner with no escape. I watched her pack her papers, stack them neatly, and slide them back into her folder. Then she looked him straight in the eyes and said, "If she finds out too soon, she might take everything and walk away. And then you'll be the one with nothing left. Remember that." She said it coldly, as if the she they were talking about wasn't me, his wife, the mother of his child, but an obstacle in their joint plan. Or worse, a liability. My knees weakened beneath me. A part of me wanted to run, to scream, to collapse right there in the grass, but another part, the part that loved my son, the part that fought for my family all these years, forced me to stand still, to breathe, to push down the pain, and focus on the truth hidden between their words. When she left through the back door, taking a different exit than the front, another detail that made my stomach twist, she didn't see me. She walked briskly toward a black sedan parked discreetly on the side street, her movements confident, practiced, as if visits like this were routine. When the door shut behind her and the engine faded, I stepped forward, the morning sun catching my trembling hands, and I felt an old, unfamiliar strength rising inside me. I realized I wasn't dealing with a simple betrayal. I was standing in the middle of a trap, one I didn't know existed until today. And if I wanted to protect myself, my son, and the life I built, I needed to uncover every part of that trap before it closed around me completely. Inside the house, I heard David sigh heavily, unaware that I was just outside the window, watching him as if he were a stranger I no longer recognized. And I knew that when I walked through that door, pretending I had just returned home early, everything in our lives would begin to unravel. But I wasn't ready to confront him yet. Not until I knew the full depth of the betrayal. And the only way to uncover it was to keep pretending I knew nothing at all. I stood in the backyard for several minutes after the woman's car disappeared, letting the cold reality settle inside me like an unwelcome guest. My hands felt numb, my legs weak, and every breath I took came out shaky, like my lungs were struggling to accept the truth forming in the edges of my mind. I had come outside that morning expecting a normal day, expecting routine, expecting the familiar rhythm of our family life. But instead, I uncovered a hidden world inside my own home, a world built on secrets, whispers, and deadlines I had never known existed. The pain was sharp, but beneath it, something else was rising, something stronger than heartbreak and more dangerous than anger. Suspicion, determination, fear mixed with a clarity that made me feel suddenly, painfully awake. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. But I also knew that walking through the front door now, trembling and broken, would give David the advantage. He would sense something was wrong. He would retreat, hide evidence, close off the conversation I needed to decode. So instead of confronting him, I walked quietly along the side of the house, pretending I had forgotten something in the car. I picked up my bag from the front seat just to make the lie convincing, then took a long breath, preparing myself to enter the home like nothing had happened. My fingers tightened around the doorknob. I forced my heartbeat to slow, even though my body was shaking from the inside out. When I stepped into the living room, David was sitting on the couch, elbows resting on his knees, his head bowed slightly as if the weight of the world pressed onto his shoulders. He looked up the moment he heard the door, and a flicker of surprise washed across his face, vanishing quickly behind a tight smile. "You're back early," he said, voice too controlled, too careful, the kind of tone people use when they're hiding something sharp behind their back. His eyes darted toward the kitchen, as if checking whether any trace of the woman remained. I forced a smile and tried to make my voice sound casual. "Yeah, I forgot some documents. Thought I'd grab them before the meeting." I kept my tone light, almost airy, even though inside me a fire was spreading, slow and dangerous. He nodded, relieved, but still tense. "Everything okay?" he asked, trying to sound unaffected. Everything was not okay. Nothing was okay. But I looked at him, the man I had built a life with, the man who held my heart for years, and I couldn't let him see even a crack in the mask I was wearing. So I said, "Just tired," and walked past him toward the stairs. He didn't follow me, but I could feel his eyes on my back, heavy and uncertain, as if he sensed something was shifting without knowing what. When I reached my bedroom, I closed the door gently and sat on the edge of the bed, letting the quiet wrap around me. Malik was at school, innocent and unaware of the storm that was building between his parents. My hands were still shaking, and I pressed them against my legs, trying to steady myself. I knew I needed more information. I needed to understand what transfer, deadline, and before she finds out meant. I needed to know who that woman was and why she carried herself with such authority inside my home. And I needed to know what David was hiding in such secrecy that he couldn't tell his own wife. I tried to replay everything I overheard, repeating the fragments like pieces of a puzzle I was desperate to assemble. "Move everything, she manages the expenses, no more time. Transfer before the 15th, otherwise you lose more than you can imagine." Those words echoed in my mind like dark warnings. Something financial. Something risky. Something involving my name, because I handled our bills, our accounts, our savings. If something was being moved behind my back, that meant he was trying to hide it from me. But why? What had changed? What had he done? I stood up and opened his side of the closet, scanning quickly. Nothing seemed unusual. Shirts neatly hung, shoes lined in a row, the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the fabric. But the ordinary was what frightened me. Secrets rarely lived in visible places. They crawled into corners and lined themselves with normalcy to stay hidden. I moved toward his nightstand, pulling the drawer open slowly. Receipts, loose coins, an old watch, a set of keys, and some papers that looked like insurance forms. Nothing alarming at first glance. I was about to close the drawer when something tucked beneath the papers caught my eye. A folded envelope, unmarked. My heartbeat jumped as my fingers slipped under it and pulled it out. It felt thick, multiple pages inside, and the weight of it made my pulse hammer against my neck. I hesitated, listening for David's footsteps downstairs, making sure he wasn't coming up. The house remained silent. Slowly, carefully, I opened the envelope. My breath caught as I unfolded the first page. It was a bank document, not from our joint account, but from an account I had never seen before. An account in David's name only, opened just 3 months ago, with deposits that totaled far more than his salary. My stomach dropped, and my vision blurred for a moment as fear rushed through me. Where did this money come from? Why wasn't it in our shared financial records? And why was he hiding it? I flipped to the second page. It was worse. A withdrawal slip, a large one. Then another. And another. All within a few weeks. The third page was the most chilling of all. A written authorization form for a future transfer of the remaining balance, scheduled for the 15th. My fingers tightened around the paper. The 15th. The deadline the woman had mentioned. The deadline before I found out. My breathing grew shallow as the walls closed in slowly. If he transferred all of it before the 15th, it would disappear into an account I had no access to, leaving me with nothing. Money that should have belonged to our family was being funneled into a secret vault I didn't know existed. And whatever he planned to do next, it wasn't something he wanted me to discover. A creak sounded from downstairs, snapping me back to the moment. I quickly folded the papers, slipped them back into the envelope, and placed everything exactly as it was. My hands trembled as I closed the drawer, Then I stood still, listening. David moved into the kitchen, humming again, unaware that the foundation of our marriage had cracked open beneath us. I walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at myself in the mirror. I didn't look like the same woman who kissed her son goodbye just an hour ago. I looked like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into a truth she never wished to confront. A knock on the bathroom door made me jolt. "Honey," David called. "You okay?" I dried my face quickly, steadied my voice, and answered, "Yeah, I'm fine." But inside, I was anything but fine. I knew now that my husband was planning something monumental behind my back, something that could destroy everything I worked for. And the woman in the green blouse wasn't a mistress. She was something far more dangerous. And I had to uncover the truth before the 15th or lose everything. For the rest of the morning, I walked around the house like a ghost trapped in my own life. I moved through familiar rooms with unfamiliar eyes, noticing small things I had ignored for months: a locked drawer in David's office, his sudden habit of taking work calls outside, the fact that he had started going for late-night drives that never used to be part of his routine. I tried to recall every moment that hinted at secrecy, every glance he avoided, every slip in conversation I brushed aside as stress or fatigue. Once you suspect betrayal, your mind becomes a detective, replaying old scenes with new meaning, and every detail feels like a clue you were blind to before. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to stay calm, because panic would blur the edges of the truth I needed to see clearly. Downstairs, I could hear David washing dishes, humming softly as if nothing was wrong. The normalcy of the sound felt like a mockery, like a mask he wore so easily while hiding something that could tear our family apart. I walked downstairs, wearing a neutral expression I didn't feel, and he looked up briefly, offering me a small smile, oblivious to the storm building inside me. "You heading back to work?" he asked casually, drying his hands on a towel. I nodded, forcing my lips into a half-smile.
"Yeah."
Just grabbing my laptop. My voice didn't shake, even though my heart was racing at a speed that made me lightheaded. He nodded and turned to put away the dish towel, and for a moment I watched him, the man I had loved for a decade, the man I believed I knew better than anyone. But now, looking at him, I felt a distance I couldn't bridge. There was a stranger living in my house, wearing my husband's face. I left the house quietly, but instead of going to work, I drove a few streets away and parked under the shade of a large tree. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I tried to process everything again. The secret account, the withdrawals,
The deadline.
the woman with the folder, the warnings about me finding out too soon. Pieces were forming a picture, but not a full one.
Not yet.
And I knew one thing for certain. If I confronted David now, he would lie. He would hide. He would manipulate the story until I felt confused or guilty or paranoid. So, I needed someone else. Someone who could help me understand what I was dealing with. Someone who could guide me through the shadows of money, documents, and transfers I didn't fully comprehend. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the one person I had always trusted for straightforward answers: my sister, Alina. She was blunt, sharp, and emotionally fierce, the kind of woman who could smell deception before it entered the room. But she also had a temper that burned quickly, and telling her too soon could explode everything before I was ready. My thumb hovered over her name, but after a moment, I locked my phone again.
No.
Not yet. This needed a quieter approach. Someone who could analyze without emotion. Someone who could look at documents and read between the lines. A professional. My mind drifted to an old colleague of mine, Daniel, an accountant who once helped me with a business tax issue years ago. He was discreet, intelligent, and not the type to get involved unless absolutely necessary. Maybe he could help me understand the financial side of whatever David was hiding. But even then, I had nothing concrete to show him yet, only partial documents, overheard whispers, and a growing fear twisting inside me. I needed more evidence. I needed clarity. I let the engine run as I lowered my forehead onto the steering wheel. The quiet hum of the car soothed me for a moment, grounding me in the present. I replayed Malik's voice in my head, Someone takes daddy's place when you're gone. Those words suddenly felt heavier, layered with meaning I hadn't considered. What if the woman wasn't replacing me emotionally, but practically? What if David was building a life behind my back where I no longer existed? Not as a partner, not as a financial decision-maker, not even as the woman who shared his home. The thought sent a cold wave through me. I sat up, tightened my hands around the wheel, and made a decision. If I wanted answers, I needed to investigate quietly, smartly, and with absolute caution. I couldn't just sit in my car drowning in theories. I had to act. The first place to start was understanding who the woman was. She wasn't a friend. David never mentioned her. She wasn't from his job. His team was small and mostly male. She wasn't a neighbor. I would have recognized her. And she wasn't a family member. That much I was certain of. So who was she? And why did she hold such power in his presence? I drove back toward home but parked far away, in a spot where I could watch the house without being seen. I felt almost ashamed doing it, like a criminal hiding in the shadows of her own marriage, but the fear of losing everything was stronger than any embarrassment. After about 30 minutes, David came outside holding a garbage bag, walked to the bin and tossed it in. He didn't look around, didn't seem suspicious. If anything, he looked exhausted, rubbing the back of his neck as he lingered for a moment before going back inside. When he disappeared into the house, I stepped out of my car and walked toward the garbage bin with a pounding heart. I knew digging through the trash was desperate, shameful even. But secrets often hide in places we're too proud to search. And pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. I lifted the lid slowly. My breath caught in my throat. Inside were crumpled papers, food wrappers, and a few envelopes. Most were irrelevant, but one caught my eye, a torn corner of the same green folder the woman carried.
A chill crawled up my spine.
I reached for the crumpled paper, smoothing it carefully. It was part of an official document, the top half of a letterhead that read, Property and Asset Reallocation Notice. The words made my stomach twist.
Property.
Asset. Reallocation. Those weren't the words of a simple loan or a consultation. Those were legal, intentional, life-altering decisions. I scanned the torn fragment, and although the middle portion was missing, one line remained visible. Must be transferred to the secondary party prior to joint claim expiration. Secondary party. Expiration. Transfer. My fingers tightened around the paper as a ruthless realization took shape. The woman wasn't a lover. She was someone helping David move our shared assets, possibly out of my reach, before some legal deadline arrived. And my name, my rights, my future, all of it was being quietly maneuvered into a position of vulnerability without my knowledge. A car door suddenly slammed in the distance, startling me so badly, I dropped the paper. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to calm my racing heart. I quickly folded the fragment, slipped it into my bag, and lowered the garbage lid silently. As I walked back to my car, the cold air stinging my face, one chilling thought echoed loudly inside me. David wasn't planning to leave me. He was planning to leave me with nothing. And I realized something else too, something far more terrifying. Whatever was happening had already begun. That entire afternoon felt like I was living in someone else's body, moving through a maze of fear and uncertainty with my thoughts scattering in every direction. I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour, circling streets I barely recognized, because I didn't trust myself to go anywhere specific until the trembling in my hand stopped. Every few minutes, I replayed the fragment of the document I'd found in the trash, letting its meaning sink deeper into the cracks of my understanding. Property and asset reallocation. Those weren't casual words. They were the language of strategy, of separation, of someone preparing for a future that did not include me. The kind of preparation a person made when they wanted full control, control of money, control of property, control of decisions, without sharing that control with the partner who helped build everything alongside them. But the question that burned hotter than all the others was why? Why would David, a man who had always trusted me with bills, paperwork, budgeting, planning, suddenly start shifting assets behind my back? Why would he hide a legal deadline from me? Why involve another woman, a professional who seemed to guide him through the shadows of whatever this was. What had changed? What had pushed him into desperation? My mind flipped through memories like pages in a book. The arguments we had over the past year, the tension when work stressed him, the days he came home distracted, distant, wrapped in private thoughts he didn't share. Had he been planning this for months? Had everything I thought was normal been a carefully crafted illusion? By the time I parked in an empty grocery store lot, the sun was already sliding down the sky, casting long shadows across the asphalt. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes, letting the quiet noise of traffic in the distance settle my nerves. I needed a plan, and I needed it now. Malik would return home soon, and I couldn't let him sense the storm brewing inside me. Children carried their parents' emotions like invisible weights, and I refused to let him shoulder anything he shouldn't have to. So I wiped the tears that had pooled in my eyes, steadied my breathing, and forced my mind into clarity. The first step was understanding the legal language. The second was identifying the woman. The third was discovering what deadline David was racing toward. And the fourth, the most painful of all, was learning what role I played in his plan. When the sky darkened enough to hide my expression, I drove back home. The lights were on when I pulled into the driveway, casting a warm glow from behind the curtains, a deceptive warmth that hid the cold truth beneath it. I held tightly, preparing the mask I needed to wear. When I stepped inside, I found Malik playing with his toys on the living room rug, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Mommy, you're home," he said, running into my arms. The pure love in his voice nearly broke me. I hugged him longer than usual, holding him tight, as if he were the anchor keeping me from collapsing completely. David walked out of the kitchen, drying his hands, pretending everything was normal. "Dinner's almost ready," he said. His tone was even, practiced, but when our eyes met, I saw something flicker inside them. Not guilt. Not affection. Something more complicated. Something like fear mixed with determination. I forced a smile and nodded, saying nothing about my long absence or the story I told him earlier. I watched him closely throughout dinner, observing every movement, every pause, every breath. He talked to Malik with forced enthusiasm, asked about school, laughed a little too loudly at small jokes, the kind of behavior people adopt when they want to appear normal even though something is collapsing inside them. When Malik went upstairs to take a shower, I stayed at the table pretending to scroll through messages on my phone. David moved around the kitchen, washing dishes, wiping counters, avoiding my gaze. The silence between us grew heavy, like two strangers sharing a room for the first time. I wanted to ask him everything, demand answers, scream, cry, but I swallowed all of it. This wasn't the time. I needed strategy, not emotion. Confrontation would only push him deeper into secrecy. When he finally sat across from me, I felt his eyes lingering on me, studying me, as if trying to determine whether I knew anything. "You were gone a long time," he said carefully. I lifted my head and gave a small shrug. "Bad traffic. And I had to stop for gas." He nodded slowly, uncertain. Silence stretched between us. The kind of silence that grows teeth. A moment later, he said, "You seem quiet today. Everything okay?" The question felt like a trap, like he needed to measure my reaction to decide his next move. I met his gaze with a steady one of my own. "Just tired," I replied. "Long day." I kept my voice calm, my expression neutral, and I saw his shoulders relax slightly. Not completely, but enough to tell me he believed the lie. Or, at least, he wanted to believe it. After dinner, David went into his office and closed the door. Not locked, just closed. But that was enough to strengthen my suspicion. He rarely closed it before. Only when he wanted privacy. Only when he didn't want Malik or me wandering in. Only when he was hiding something. While he was occupied, I sat with Malik on the couch as he watched cartoons, but my mind wasn't on the screen. My eyes kept drifting toward the hallway, toward the door of David's office. I needed to see what he was working on. I needed access to whatever he kept inside that room. My pulse quickened with the thought. But I also needed to be careful. If I made even the slightest mistake, he would know. After Malik's bedtime routine, I kissed his forehead, tucked him into his blanket, and waited until his breathing slowed into soft, even rhythms. I checked the clock, 9:18 p.m. David was still in the office. I walked quietly down the stairs and passed by the door. I could hear faint typing, then the creak of a chair. I needed a distraction. Something to pull him out long enough for me to slip inside. But what? My mind raced. Then, an idea struck. I walked into the laundry room and flipped the breaker that controlled one section of the house. Instantly, the lights in the hallway and David's office went out. I heard his startled voice. "What the?" He stood up, footsteps moving toward the door. I grabbed a laundry basket to make the cover believable and pretended to be checking the machine when he appeared in the doorway. "Power's acting weird again," I said casually. "Can you help me figure it out?" He grumbled something under his breath, annoyed but not suspicious, and walked toward the basement to deal with the breaker panel. The moment he disappeared down the stairs, I moved quickly toward the office door, my heartbeat thundering inside my ears. I pushed it open silently and stepped inside. The room felt different now, not like the home office I knew, but like a place of secrets. His laptop was open on the desk, the screen dimmed, but still active. Papers were scattered across the table, receipts, legal documents, scribbled notes. I didn't have time to analyze everything, so I snapped quick photos with my phone, my hands shaking as I captured each page. One note caught my eye, a handwritten reminder. Final meeting, 13th, sign forms. Move remaining funds, 13th. That was 2 days before the deadline. My pulse spiked as I snapped a photo of it too. I heard a loud click from the basement, David flipping the breaker back on. I had seconds. I closed the laptop halfway, shifted the papers back into place, and slipped out of the room, running silently to the kitchen just as the lights came back on. David emerged from the basement, wiping his hands. "Should be fixed now," he said. I nodded with a relieved smile, hiding the storm of panic inside me. When he went back to his office, unaware of what I had done, I whispered a shaky breath into the quiet kitchen. I finally proof that something major was happening on the 13th. Proof that more money was being moved. Proof that the woman wasn't a lover. She was someone helping him shift the foundation of our financial life without me knowing. But the most chilling questions still lingered. What was happening on the 13th that required a secret meeting? And why was my husband preparing for a future that didn't include me? The night passed slowly, each hour stretching long and heavy as my mind replayed every stolen glimpse of the truth. I lay awake in bed beside David, who fell asleep unusually fast, as if exhaustion had swallowed him whole. I listened to his breathing, steady, calm, almost peaceful, and wondered how someone planning something so devastating could rest so effortlessly. My own chest felt tight, my thoughts twisted into knots. The photos I took of his documents stayed on my phone, hidden behind a locked folder, like the shadows of a danger creeping closer each hour. I knew I had only a few days before the 13th, and whatever happened that day would determine the fate of my home, my finances, my marriage. The clock beside my bed blinked past 2 a.m., but sleep remained distant, refusing to soothe me. When dawn finally broke, I got out of bed quietly, trying not to wake David. I made coffee with trembling hands, staring at the dark liquid swirling inside the mug. My life suddenly felt like that cup, troubled, unsettled, with something poisonous sinking to the bottom where I couldn't quite see it. Malik padded into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, unaware of the turmoil just beneath our roof. I hugged him tightly, breathing in the gentle scent of childhood innocence that he still carried. His presence reminded me why I couldn't crumble, why I had to stay sharp, why I had to get ahead of whatever scheme was unfolding around me. After dropping Malik at school, I parked around the corner and pulled out my phone, opening the photos I'd taken last night. I zoomed in on each document, piecing together timelines, amounts, names, signatures. One form was a property adjustment draft. It listed our home's address, but had a section labeled Primary Owner Adjustment. My name wasn't in the primary slot. David's was. And another name was listed under the secondary slot, but it was blurred, scribbled, incomplete on the portion I'd captured. I tried to enhance it slightly, but the image was too grainy. However, the first letter was clear, an A. I felt chills run through me. The woman's name could have started with an A, or maybe the new owner was someone else entirely. Was this about debt? Business? Divorce? Or something even darker? The next document chilled me even more, a draft agreement outlining a voluntary division of jointly acquired assets. The phrase vibrated in my mind like a threat. Voluntary division. Without telling me? Without my signature? Without legal oversight? Then came another sheet, a timeline. A sequence of steps. Meetings with initials next to dates, including the upcoming 13th. One line read, secure safe location for remaining funds. Another read, finalized transfer authorization. Second party must confirm. Second party. Not third. Second. Meaning there were only two people legally involved in this agreement. Which meant it wasn't the woman. It was someone else. Someone legally tied to David. Someone with power equal to his. Someone like
Me.
But I hadn't agreed to anything. I hadn't signed anything. I wasn't participating in any transfer. Unless someone forged something. Unless someone was using my identity. Unless someone was manipulating my name without me knowing. My heart pounded so hard I felt dizzy. I scrolled further through the photos, trying to calm my breath. Then I spotted a note I hadn't noticed last night. The one taped beneath David's laptop, partially hidden under a stack of receipts. I zoomed in. Tiny writing. Words I hadn't let myself process before. EM will handle signature replication. Keep documents away from M until final stage. Signature replication. My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes. My signature? Replicated? Forged? Used to move assets I helped build? My entire body shook as I tried to make sense of it. Someone was helping David fake my consent to steal what belonged to both of us. Malik's voice echoed in my mind again. Someone is taking Daddy's place when you're gone. Maybe he saw the woman as taking Daddy's place, but the truth was far more twisted. She wasn't taking David's place. She was helping take mine. I put the phone down and pressed my palms against my forehead. This wasn't infidelity. This wasn't a simple betrayal of love or loyalty. This was calculated.
Strategic.
A dismantling of everything I owned, everything I worked for, without my knowledge. And the worst part was that I didn't know why. What had happened to push David into something so extreme? After swallowing the fear rising in my throat, I started the car and drove to someone I had avoided involving. My sister Lena. She had always been the sharper one. The one who could cut through lies like a blade. She lived only 15 minutes away, and on the drive there I rehearsed what I would say, how much I would reveal, how much I could hide. But when I reached her street, fate intervened. Her car wasn't there. She was gone. I pulled over anyway, resting my forehead against the steering wheel. I needed another option. Daniel. My accountant acquaintance. Not family. Not emotional. Not dramatic. Logical. Observant. Private. I searched for his number in my contacts and called, hoping he hadn't changed it. When he answered, his voice was groggy, confused. Hello. Daniel, it's me, I said quickly. I need a favor. A big one. And it has to stay absolutely confidential. There was a long pause. Are you okay? He finally asked. No, I whispered, my voice cracking. I'm not. He heard the truth in my tone and agreed to meet me at his office within an hour. When I arrived, he was already waiting, his brow furrowed with concern as he watched me walk in. We sat across from each other in the small meeting room, and I placed my phone on the table with shaking hands, opening the photos. I need you to look at these, I said, and tell me if I'm imagining the worst, or if the worst is real. He went silent as he flipped through each image. His expression changed gradually, confusion, then discomfort, then alarm. After several minutes, he set the phone down and looked at me with eyes that no longer held uncertainty. This is serious, he said. My hands tightened around each other. Tell me exactly what it means. He took a breath. It means someone is preparing to move assets without your legal consent. It means there's an attempt to reassign ownership before you can intervene. And it means someone is planning something irreversible. I felt my breath vanish. So, what do I do? He leaned forward. Whatever is happening on the 13th is critical. If you want to stop this, you need to know who the second party is. The person whose name begins with A. Because whoever that is, they're involved as deeply as David. A tremor ran through me. A? Could it be the woman? Daniel shook his head. Not likely. These documents require someone with a legal tie to the property. A spouse, a parent, a cosigner. A spouse. A parent. A cosigner. My blood turned to ice. Daniel's voice dropped lower. Who else has access to your personal information? Who else knows your signature? Who else could be involved without raising suspicion? A cold, horrifying possibility crept into my mind, one I hadn't allowed myself to consider until now. Someone close to me. Someone I trusted. Someone who knew everything about my marriage, my finances, my routines. I whispered the name before I could stop myself. Alina. The name left my lips like a tremor, soft but violent, and Daniel's expression tightened the moment he heard it. Alina. My sister. My blood. My confidant. The one person I believed would never betray me. The thought alone felt like swallowing broken glass, sharp enough to cut through every memory we ever shared. He leaned back slowly, studying me carefully. I'm not saying she is, he said cautiously, but you need to consider every possibility. Someone close to you is involved, someone with access to your identity. And a forged signature isn't something a stranger can pull off easily. His words pressed against my chest like a heavy stone, suffocating every breath. I stared at him, numb, trying to reconcile the image of my supportive, loud, fiercely protective sister with a cold idea of her sitting across from David, signing documents that stripped me of my life. The two realities didn't match. They couldn't. But the more I tried to deny it, the more fragments of unexplained moments from the past months resurfaced, like pieces of a puzzle I had refused to assemble until now. Alina had been distant lately, canceling lunch plans, ignoring calls, showing up randomly at my house asking strange questions about bills, home repairs, legal letters. She asked once if I had updated my signature with the bank, a question I brushed off as random curiosity. She mentioned David in odd ways too, telling me that marriage changes people and that you should always know your own worth. At the time, I thought she was just trying to look out for me, but now those conversations replayed with sinister undertones I had been blind to. My hands trembled as I pressed them against the table. She wouldn't, I whispered. She's my sister. She loved Malik. She loved me. She wouldn't. My voice cracked under the weight of betrayal I couldn't yet accept. Daniel leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. You need to be prepared for anything. Family doesn't always mean loyalty in situations involving money or desperation. I've seen people betray their closest loved ones for far less than what's at stake here. Money. Desperation. My mind immediately drifted to the last conversation I'd had with Alina about her finances, how her business wasn't doing well, how she had taken loans she wasn't confident she could pay back, how she broke down crying at my kitchen table while I held her shoulders. She was drowning and I didn't know, because she didn't tell me everything. Or maybe she did, and I refused to listen. The truth hit me like a cold slap. Alina was capable of hiding things. Big things. She was capable of desperation. But was she capable of this? The forging of her own sister's identity to help take her money? To help my husband secretly reassign our property? The possibility made my stomach twist so violently I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. Daniel pulled out a small notepad, scribbling something down. Listen, he said, you don't have to confront anyone yet. That could make things worse. What you need right now is more information. You need to find out exactly who's meeting David on the 13th and what documents are being signed. And before that, you need to protect yourself legally. His eyes met mine with a seriousness that made my pulse spike. Freeze your accounts. Lock access to your identity. Put a temporary hold on joint transactions. You need to be the one who acts before they do. His words made sense, but they also terrified me. If I made a move, David might notice and accelerate whatever he was planning. If I didn't make a move, I might lose everything. I took a shaky breath.
Help me do it, I said.
Help me secure everything quietly. He nodded, already grabbing his laptop. We'll start now. For the next hour, we worked in silence, the only sounds being the clicking of keys and the rapid beating of my heart. Daniel helped me put holds on large transfers, set up alerts for any activity involving my name, and prepare documents that could protect me in case anything escalated. He guided me meticulously, making sure each step was subtle enough not to be detected unless someone looked closely. When we finished, I felt a fragile sense of security settle in my chest. Temporary, yes, but enough to keep me from drowning completely. Before I left his office, Daniel placed a hand on the table, stopping me. One more thing, he said, lowering his voice. Be careful around both of them, David and Alina. If they're working together, they won't stay subtle for long once they realize you're becoming difficult to manipulate. My heartbeat quickened painfully. I won't confront them yet, I promised. Not until I know the full truth. He nodded slowly, unable to hide the concern in his eyes. The drive home felt unreal, as if the world had shifted slightly off its axis. The familiar streets now looked like a stage where everyone knew the script except me. When I pulled into the driveway, David's car was still gone. He was at work. Malik wouldn't be home for another 2 hours. The silence of the house felt heavier than usual, filled with the weight of secrets pressing against the walls. As soon as I stepped inside, my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. My heart lurched as I opened it. Meeting confirmed for the 13th. All papers will be ready. Do not delay this time. My blood went cold. The message wasn't addressed to me. Clearly it was intended for David. But why did it come to my phone? Had someone mistakenly sent it? Or was it intentional? A warning? A mistake? I stared at the message, my hands trembling violently. The number wasn't saved, but it looked familiar, too familiar. I scrolled through old calls and paused when I found it. Alina. My sister's number. A cold shiver ran down my spine, settling deep inside my bones. I stared at the screen for several long seconds, trying to process what this meant. The fear that had been building inside me exploded into something sharp and undeniable. She wasn't just involved. She was orchestrating something. I needed answers, answers that only she could give. But confronting her directly would be dangerous. So instead, I decided to find out the truth another way. I grabbed my keys again, drove to her neighborhood, and parked across the street where she couldn't see me. Her car was in the driveway. She was home. I sat there for several minutes, watching her windows, fighting the urge to march inside and demand an explanation. But I had to be smart. I had to be cautious. I needed proof. So I waited to see who she called, waited to see who came to visit, waited to see if David appeared. After 20 long minutes, her front door opened, and the woman in the green blouse stepped out. My breath caught so violently that tears filled my eyes. The world didn't just tilt. It shattered. The sight of the woman in the green blouse stepping out of my sister's house sent a shock through me so violent that for a moment I couldn't breathe. My entire body turned cold, as if every drop of warmth had drained from my veins. There she was, the woman I thought was my husband's secret accomplice, the woman who walked into my home with confidence, the woman carrying documents, deadlines, warnings, now walking casually down my sister's porch steps as if she'd visited a friend, not a partner in crime. My fingers tightened painfully around the steering wheel as she paused at the bottom of the steps, checking her phone before heading to the same black sedan I had seen earlier. My heart pounded wildly against my ribs. The puzzle pieces that had been scattered across my mind now began sliding silently into place, forming an image far more devastating than anything I had been prepared for. Alina wasn't being manipulated. She wasn't being misled. She wasn't being used.
She was involved.
Intentionally. Actively.
Deeply.
The woman, the one Malik saw, the one meeting David, the one handling documents, wasn't replacing me. She wasn't replacing David. She was replacing loyalty. She was the bridge between my husband and my sister. And whatever plan they were constructing, whatever deadline they were racing toward, whatever future they were building, it didn't have me in it. My breath trembled as the woman climbed into her car and drove away. Once she disappeared, I turned my gaze back to the house I knew better than any place except my own. The curtains were slightly parted. A shadow moved inside. I leaned closer to the steering wheel, watching intensely, trying to catch a glimpse. Moments later, my sister appeared in the window. She wasn't crying. She wasn't anxious. She wasn't hesitant. She was smiling. A soft, satisfied smile that twisted something deep inside me until it snapped. I recoiled backward in my seat as if struck. My thoughts spiraled chaotically. How long had this been going on? How long had she been meeting that woman? How long had she been working with David? Had the meetings been happening here all along? Had Malik seen her before? Did she ever step into my home under the guise of a stranger, while my sister orchestrated everything from the sidelines? I felt sick. Betrayal from a spouse was one thing. Betrayal from your own sister cut in a way that felt almost inhuman. A wound blooming inside me like a bruise under pale skin. After a few minutes, Alina left the window and disappeared deeper into the house. And something inside me hardened. I couldn't sit there drowning in emotion. I needed answers. I needed the full truth, every twisted piece of it. And I needed proof. Proof of their connection. Proof of their intentions. Proof that would hold weight if this plan escalated into something legal or financial or destructive. I waited until our house settled into stillness, until the world calmed into that quiet lull only late afternoon brings. Then I stepped out of my car, moving silently across the street like a shadow. I approached her backyard through the narrow alley, avoiding the front door, avoiding visibility. I reached the fence, peered through the slats, and saw something that tightened the knot in my throat even further. Her patio table had documents scattered across it, familiar-looking papers, forms, folders, and a binder with a name sticker on it. I squinted, my heart leaping when I recognized the same green folder the woman always carried. The same shade, the same shape, the same type. My sister had a copy. She wasn't just part of the plan. She had central documents in her possession. I reached for my phone and zoomed in as much as I could, capturing photos of everything on the table. The text wasn't fully readable, but the headers were unmistakable. Asset transfer draft. Reallocation notice. Secondary authorization form. And beside them, a notepad with messy handwriting. My sister's handwriting. My stomach twisted violently as I captured every angle, my breath uneven, my fingers trembling. Suddenly, I heard the back door opening. I dropped down behind the fence, my heart slamming against my ribs as Alina stepped out into the patio. She hummed softly, the same tune she used to hum when she did our makeup before parties, the same tune she used when baking cookies as teenagers. A tune that had once been comforting now sounded like a knife to my ears. She shuffled papers, sighed heavily, then spoke into the phone. I leaned closer, listening. "Yeah, she doesn't suspect anything," she said calmly. My body stiffened. "She's acting normal. I told you, she trusts too easily." A sharp pain shot through my chest. "She won't see it coming. We just need to get him through the 13th without him panicking again."
She paused.
"No, he won't back out. Not after everything we've done to put this into motion." Another pause. "Yes, I spoke to her today. She'll have the final documents prepared." The tone of her voice was so casual, so calculated, that it made my skin crawl. I pressed my back against the fence, my breath caught between fury and despair. "And don't worry," she continued. "Once everything is in his name and the signatures are finalized, she can't do anything. It'll be over." I closed my eyes, trying to stop the room from spinning. Another pause. "No, she has no idea he moved the money. She still thinks everything's normal. Honestly, I don't feel bad. She would have never understood." The world around me went numb. My sister, my own sister, talking about me as if I were an obstacle, as if I stood in the way of some grand plan she and David shared. I stayed frozen until she walked back inside and closed the door behind her. When I finally rose, my legs felt like they could barely support me. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of the storm inside my head. Betrayal layered on betrayal. Lies woven into my life like threads I hadn't seen until now. A husband planning to remove me financially, a sister helping him forge my signature, and a mysterious woman guiding them both, like a puppeteer with perfect control. I backed away from the fence, my hands shaking violently, and walked toward my car. I sat down, closed the door, and allowed the tears to fall freely for the first time. Not silent, not restrained, but raw, shaking sobs that came from a place so deep it scared me. Everything I believed in, love, family, trust, had been shattered by the two people I trusted most in the world. When the sobs finally weakened, a cold clarity settled inside me. A clarity born from pain, but stronger than fear. They thought I was naive. They thought I was blind. They thought I would walk right into their trap without ever questioning the shadows around me. They were wrong. Very wrong. And right then, sitting in the quiet street outside my sister's home, I made a vow to myself, one that steadied my breathing and sharpened my mind. They want to take everything from me. But before the 13 teach, I will take back everything they stole. And I will expose every secret they buried. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was war. The car ride home felt like drifting through fog, thick, disorienting, suffocating. My fingers clenched the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, but it still wasn't enough to ground me. Not after what I had just witnessed. Not after hearing my own sister speak about me like I was nothing more than a stepping stone in their quiet, calculated scheme. The betrayal stung deeper than any wound I had ever known. If David's deception was a knife, Alina's was the blade twisted cruelly afterward, splitting every fragile piece of trust I'd ever given her. I used to believe that blood protected blood, that siblings didn't cross certain lines, that family was a shield, a place of loyalty. But now I understood something darker. Sometimes family held the sharpest knives. When I arrived home, the lights were off, and the house lay silent under the early evening sky. Malik was still at his playgroup, and David wasn't home yet. The emptiness made the walls seem taller, the rooms colder. I walked inside slowly and closed the door behind me, leaning against it as my breath trembled from exhaustion and disbelief. For a moment, I allowed myself to sink into the silence, letting the quiet of the house wrap around me like a blanket I didn't ask for. The betrayal didn't just hurt. It rewired me. It forced something dormant inside me to wake up, something fierce, something calculating, something determined to survive. I forced myself to move, heading upstairs to my bedroom. I took my phone out, opened the photos again, and studied each document more carefully now that I understood the pieces. The property transfer draft, the asset reallocation form, the signature replication note, the scheduled meeting on the 13th. The fact that two people, David and someone whose name began with a, were listed as authorized parties. And now I had seen the green folder at Alina's house. That alone confirmed what I feared. She wasn't just an accessory. She was a key player. But there was still something I didn't understand. What was she gaining? Why would she help David? Why risk forging documents, manipulating legal papers, and sneaking behind my back? My mind spiraled through possibilities: financial desperation, emotional manipulation, jealousy, revenge for something I didn't know. And then a darker thought crept in. Maybe it wasn't about her gaining something. Maybe it was about me losing something. I needed answers directly from her, but I knew better than to confront her openly. She would lie. She would deflect. She would play the role of the injured sister, twisting the narrative until she looked like the victim and I looked irrational. She had always been skilled at shaping stories to her advantage. Even as children, she could frame a situation so perfectly that adults believed her instantly. That skill had grown sharper with age. I couldn't walk into her trap, not now. Instead, I picked up my laptop and began digging. First, I searched for property and asset reallocation notice, combing through legal references. Then I researched forgery laws, signature replication techniques, financial deadlines involving joint accounts. The more I read, the clearer the pattern became. The transfer they were attempting required 2 signatures, if not mine, then a forged version. But even with that forgery, the transfer wasn't complete until the final confirmation meeting. If I blocked it before then, the whole plan would collapse. Especially if I exposed the fraud before the 13th. My heart began to pound with renewed purpose. They had cornered me, but they had also left a trail I could twist back on them. But information wasn't enough to fight them. I needed legal armor. Real professionals. I needed someone who could represent me and protect me without ever notifying David or Alina. I opened my contacts and searched for the number of a family lawyer my coworker had recommended 2 years ago during her divorce, a woman named Cassandra Holt. I had saved the number at the time without any thought of ever needing it. Funny how life changed. I dialed with trembling hands and prayed she would answer. When she picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice was firm, warm, and focused. "This is Cassandra." For a moment, my voice stuck in my throat. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to tell someone that my husband and my sister were conspiring against me in the shadows of my marriage. But Cassandra's tone offered an unexpected comfort, not emotional, but stable. The kind of stability I desperately needed. "I need legal help," I finally said. "As soon as possible." She asked a few initial questions, nothing invasive, just enough to understand urgency. When I told her, "It's about financial manipulation and potential identity fraud," her tone sharpened instantly. "Come in first thing tomorrow morning," she said. "No delays." A small sense of relief washed over me. A professional. Someone who understood the law better than the snakes weaving through my personal life. Someone who could help me build a shield before they sank their fangs in deeper. I hung up the phone just as headlights flashed across the living room window. David was home. My stomach twisted painfully. I closed my laptop, hid the documents, and tried to steady myself. When he entered the house, he looked exhausted, but not the kind of exhaustion that came from physical work. It was the weariness of someone living a double life, tangled in lies he could barely keep track of. He glanced at me, searching my face, and I forced myself not to flinch. "You okay?" he asked gently, placing his keys on the table. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice steady but distant. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on me for longer than normal, studying me, assessing me. He sensed the shift, not because I showed it, but because the cracks in his own scheme were starting to widen. And fear makes guilty people observant. At dinner, tension crawled between us like a silent intruder. Malik chattered happily about his day, oblivious to the darkness weaving between the adults sitting across from each other. I kept my eyes down, answering just enough to seem normal. David spoke in clipped sentences. Distracted, restless. His phone buzzed twice, and each time he silenced it quickly, refusing to read the message in front of me. I didn't need to see the screen to know who it was from. When Malik went to bed, David approached me cautiously, almost nervously. "You've been distant," he said. "Is something wrong? Did I do something?" The question hit me like a blow. The audacity of a man hiding behind lies, pretending concern, pretending innocence. But I stayed calm. I shrugged. "Just tired." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. But his eyes flickered with something else. Guilt, maybe, or fear that I was starting to see through him. Before he could speak again, his phone lit up with a message. The screen flashed long enough for me to catch a glimpse, a single letter.
A.
My breath stilled. He snatched the phone quickly, turning the screen down. I didn't react. I didn't ask. I simply walked past him and went upstairs, letting silence be my answer. When I reached my bedroom, I sat on the floor beside my bed, hugging my knees tight. For several long minutes, I stared at the carpet, listening to the muffled sound of David pacing downstairs, sensing his growing anxiety. And then something unexpected happened, something that snapped the last fragile thread of hope inside me. A message arrived on my phone. Unknown number. Does she know yet? The same number that messaged earlier. The same number belonging to Alina. My heart froze. Before I could type anything, another message arrived. Unknown number. David is starting to panic. Make sure she stays distracted until the 13th. My breath shattered inside me. They thought they were messaging David, but they had messaged me. My fingers trembled as I stared at the words. That was it. That was the final confirmation. No more guesses. No more theories. No more shadows. This was betrayal in its purest form. Deliberate. Cruel. Calculated. And they had just handed me their entire plan on a silver platter by mistake. I wiped the tears from my cheeks and steadied my breath, a new strength rising from the ashes of my pain. If they wanted war, I would give them war. But on my terms. That night felt different, as if the walls themselves had grown ears, and the silence carried a pulse. I sat on the bedroom floor, that message still glowing on my phone screen like a poisoned confession. Does she know yet? Make sure she stays distracted until the 13th. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, each pulse a reminder that the people I trusted most were preparing to destroy my life in less than 3 days. A part of me still struggled to absorb it. The betrayal, the plot, the deception so elaborate it made my skin crawl. But beneath the shock, something else had taken root, a cold, sharp determination that spread through my veins like steel. They believed I was blind. They believed I was weak. They believed they could corner me and watch me crumble. But now I had the truth in my hands, proof that would burn their scheme to ashes. I spent the next hour screenshotting every message, saving every photo, archiving every detail. I backed up everything in 3 different places, a locked cloud folder, a hidden drive on my laptop, and a printed copy I sealed inside an envelope. By the time I finished, a strange calm
settled inside me. Not peace.
Not acceptance, but the steady readiness of someone preparing for battle. David came upstairs late, his steps slow, hesitant, as if unsure how to approach me. When he entered the room, I was lying on the bed with my back to him, breathing evenly, as if asleep. He stood by the doorway for a long moment, watching me, then let out a quiet sigh, a soft exhale packed with guilt, worry, and something I couldn't quite decipher. After a moment, he slipped into bed beside me, leaving a careful distance between us, as if afraid to touch me. I kept my breathing steady, my body still, refusing to let him read even a flicker of my thoughts. Eventually, he fell asleep, but I stayed awake, watching, thinking, preparing. By morning, my plan was clear, ruthless, precise, silent. I would not confront them yet. I would not scream, cry, accuse, or demand. I would let them continue believing they were winning while I dismantled their entire blueprint piece by piece. I woke before dawn and slipped out of bed quietly. The house was dark and still. Malik slept peacefully in his room. David lay stretched across the mattress, unaware that his lies were about to choke him. I got dressed, grabbed my folder of evidence, and drove straight to Cassandra Holt's office while the sky was still painted with early morning gray. When I arrived, she ushered me into her office immediately, sensing the urgency. Cassandra was sharp-eyed, composed, and exuded the kind of confidence that could steady even the most chaotic heart. When I placed my phone, my printed documents, and the fusion of messages and photos on her desk, her expression darkened. "This isn't just deception," she said after a long moment. "This is full-scale fraud. It's coordinated, intentional, and punishable by law." Her words struck like thunder, but instead of fear, I felt strength surge quietly inside me. She continued, tapping her finger against the signature replication note. "This alone is enough to open a criminal investigation. And these unauthorized drafts? These illegal transfers?" She shook her head. "They won't succeed. Not anymore." "Can we stop the meeting on the 13th? I asked, voice tight. Her eyes sharpened. "We won't just stop it. We'll reverse everything they've already done." She leaned forward. "But you cannot confront them before the 13th, not even slightly. They must believe nothing is wrong." "I understand. And one more thing," she added, her voice dropping. "Don't tell your sister you know. She's deeper in this than your husband." A bitter ache throbbed in my chest, but I nodded. Cassandra drafted emergency legal protections, freezing joint asset transfers, alerting banks, initiating identity safeguards, and preparing documents that gave me temporary solo authority over critical accounts until the investigation could begin. It was the legal shield I needed, invisible, quiet, powerful. By the time I left her office, the world looked clearer. I drove home with a new composure, a sense of power I hadn't felt in days. When I walked into the house, David stood in the kitchen with Malik, helping him with breakfast. He looked up at me nervously, as though he sensed an invisible shift. But I smiled softly, a smile that hid everything he didn't know I knew. "Morning," I said pleasantly. He relaxed, visibly relieved.
Good.
The more relaxed he was, the harder he would fall. The next 2 days unfolded with eerie normalcy. David acted sweeter than usual, cooking dinner, offering to pick up Malik, even trying to initiate conversations that felt forced and unnatural. I answered politely, gently, allowing him to believe nothing had changed. But inside, I watched everything. Every nervous glance, every hidden phone call, every moment he slipped into his office to whisper with someone. On the 12th, Alina texted me, "Hey sis, wanna grab lunch tomorrow?" My treat. Tomorrow, the 13th. The day their plan was meant to finalize. I responded with a soft lie.
Sure.
"What time?" She was quick.
Noon.
"I'll pick you up."
Perfect.
Let her come. Let her believe she had the upper hand. She had no idea she was walking straight into her own downfall. The morning of the 13th arrived heavy with anticipation. I woke before dawn, my heart steady. Malik was still asleep when I kissed his forehead and whispered that I loved him. I got dressed slowly, choosing neutral clothes, nothing that would hint at the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. At exactly noon, Alina arrived. She smiled too brightly when I stepped outside. That sickly sweet expression that once felt comforting now looked like a mask stretched over something venomous. I climbed into her car, heart beating steadily beneath my ribs. She drove smoothly, talking casually, pretending everything was normal while her eyes flickered with tiny signs of tension. My phone buzzed in my bag, Cassandra's message. "In position. Go ahead." I exhaled quietly. Instead of driving toward the restaurant she mentioned, Alina suddenly took a different route, toward a corporate building district. My pulse quickened. "Where are we going?" I asked lightly. "Oh, slight change," she said with a smile. "I need to stop by a place first. Won't take long." I nodded, pretending not to notice. We pulled into the parking lot of an office complex. A black sedan was already there. David's car. I felt a slow, cold smile rising inside me. Alina parked. "Just come inside with me for a minute," she said, grabbing her purse. I followed her, my face blank, my heart burning with quiet fire. Inside the building, David was waiting in a conference room, pale, tense, and startled when he saw me walk in behind Alina. His voice cracked. What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. Alina stiffened. "You weren't supposed to." She stopped talking abruptly when a firm voice echoed from behind us. "Is there a problem here?" Everyone turned. Cassandra stood in the doorway with 2 uniformed officers behind her. David's face drained of color. Alina stumbled backward. The woman in the green blouse froze like a statue. Cassandra stepped forward, holding up a folder. "We have reason to believe multiple acts of fraud have been committed, including attempted identity theft, unauthorized asset transfer, and forgery." David whispered, "Oh God." Alina's voice shook. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," Cassandra cut in sharply. "It's not." The officers stepped forward. David reached toward me with trembling hands. Please let me explain." I stepped back. He froze. Alina's face crumpled, her voice rising with panic. "She wasn't supposed to find out yet. David, you said." Her confession collapsed into the room like a bomb. David closed his eyes, defeated. I spoke then, my voice steady, strong, unbroken. "You planned to take everything from me, but you never planned what would happen when I fought back. No shouting. No crying. Just truth. Raw, final, and sharp as a blade. The officers moved in. David broke. Alina sobbed. The woman in green stiffened as cuffs tightened around her wrists. And I stood still. Not shaking. Not weak. Not broken. Just finally free. When everything was done, statements taken, arrests made, documents collected, I stepped outside into the sunlight. The sky felt larger. The air felt cleaner. Malik's laugh echoed in my mind, filling my chest with warmth.
This wasn't the end.
This was the beginning of a new chapter one would build with my own hands. No lies, no betrayal, no shadows. I walked to my car, opened the door, and whispered to myself, I survived them. And as I drove away from the building, leaving their secrets behind like ash scattered in the wind, I knew with absolute certainty. They took their shot. But I won the war.